Okay, so cybersecurity, right? Let's think about a time when not so long ago, we could even leave our doors unlocked in our house, right? We weren't worried about that. We knew our neighbors, we knew where we lived, we had a sense of community. Guess what has happened with technology? The whole world has become our neighborhood. We don't know who is in our neighborhood anymore because it's the whole world. In some ways, it has done great things for us, and in other ways, it has brought some new challenges for us. Right? That's where cybersecurity comes in. So I want us to think about what is valuable to us in today's world, right? What is it that is most valuable to us today? It's data. Data is the most valuable thing that people want to steal from us. They don't want to steal our iPhones or iPads. Yeah, maybe some do. But they want to steal our data. That is the most valuable asset that we have. And we have a lot of it. We generate a lot of data. We consume a lot of data. And there's a lot of it. And it's growing exponentially. Right? That's what it's all about. So we're going to talk about why we need to worry about risk management from a cybersecurity point of view. Okay? So anybody seen Homeland? Anybody a fan of Homeland? It's a show on Showtime. We were hooked on it for a long time. It was about a CIA type of dramatization and very action-packed show. Right? 2012, they came out with an episode in which a terrorist organization gets access to the pacemaker code, serial number of the vice president. Right? Their idea is to be able to hack into it and cause some serious damage. And serious damage does occur. Because they can trigger a heart attack. So you have this show, a lot of dialogue, a lot of drama, a lot of suspense, and all these charts and graphs and beeping sounds in the background, and suddenly the vice president collapses. 2012, not that long ago. Not out of the realm of possibility, because in 2013, Dick Cheney, who was vice president in the Bush era, he gave an interview on ABC and shared a real concern that he had during those years. Credible concern, with a fair amount of accuracy, that he believed this could happen because he wore a pacemaker. So he got that disconnected. They thought about those risks long time ago. So what Showtime presented was not so imaginary, not so out of the realm of possibility. But they obviously dramatized it, right? They made it very dramatic. And here's a real life case of somebody taking equally dramatic action of turning off a functionality of a medical device that is life-saving. Okay, let's talk about some real practical things, because that is in the world of imagination that can happen today. But what's happening right now is stuff like this. Ransomware. Ransomware is a cyber attack designed to extract money. Somebody would basically hack into your computer system, withhold all your data and files until you pay them money. Just recently, Texas towns, 22 Texas towns were hit by that. And this is not the first time. Many other municipalities in the country have been hit by ransomware. Billions of records exposed. Anybody has a Capital One credit card? I do. And when I heard that news, it was kind of shocking. It was one of the biggest data breaches that we can think of recently. Many, many millions of people, their data was breached. So this news item was talking about billions of records exposed, and 2019 is on track to be the worst year. It's increasing in frequency and scale. Now, how about this? Patient data, which is now a little bit more critical. We're talking about personal health information from electronic health records. Somebody asking $1 million in return. So ransomware is where there's a lot of activity right now that we hear about. It's driven by essentially a financial motive. 2017, WannaCry ransomware, one of the biggest attacks that happened. 200,000 computers affected worldwide. And what's interesting to me, because my background is in healthcare and medical devices, is this attack on UK 48 national health system computers. 70,000 computers, MRI scanners, surgery equipment, people being denied service. That happened. People could not get surgeries because of that attack. There was some real system vulnerabilities because it was old system, old Windows-based system that had not been updated. And just 2 months prior to this, Microsoft had issued a security patch, which they had not updated. It was as simple as that.
2 months?
2 months prior to this attack. The most terrifying thing about that is how simple it is one of the experts talked about this attack. It's very simple. Old system, not updated, very easy to get access and do this kind of a damage across the world. Let's talk about personal health information. It's everywhere, right? We go see a doctor. First thing we do is fill out a form. All our information is there, right? How about insurance? We get insurance, all of our information is there, right? We go to the pharmacy, same thing. How about we go to the hospital or an outpatient clinic? We have so many touch points in our lives when it comes to health data. And our data is everywhere, because guess what happens? They talk to each other. Right? These companies are talking to each other, data is being shared, even though there are safeguards in place, but there's connectivity. There's a lot of connectivity. So I'll give you the top 10 data breaches. And it's important to see how rapidly and how fast it is happening, right? January 2015, over 70 million, close to 80 million people affected. 2015 again, another 11 million. So this is in the order of scale. September 2015, same year, 10 million. And these are big names, right? We recognize some of these names. 2011, about 5 million. July 2015, UCLA Health, 4 million, 4.5. Another 4.5, 4, 3.9, 3.6, 3.5. Long list. Millions of records affected by this type of data breaches. So this is real. I took the example of healthcare because that's the main area of focus I have. But I'm pretty sure that it's affecting all kind of data across the board. So the question is not if, but when. I think that's what we need to think about when it comes to cybersecurity and cyber attacks. It's not a question of if, it's not hypothetical or imaginary anymore. It's a question of when. That's a difficult question to answer. It could be now, it could be tomorrow, it could be any time. So we have to assess that risk and take appropriate actions. That's what we're going to talk about. So first we're going to talk about what is cybersecurity. Let's start with the definitions, right? Let's get everybody on board with what the definitions are. And I want to talk about the NIST framework. NIST is National Institute of Standards and Technology. Why is that important? Is because it is applicable across the board, no matter what industry you look at. So that should give you a baseline to start thinking about how you could even utilize this framework to have a cybersecurity risk management program. Then I want to spend a little bit more time on the medical devices, why it is relevant. And again, I'll share with you my experience in risk management, how it could be integrated with that risk management process. And leave you with 3 recommendations, particularly in the risk management of medical device industry. Okay? But again, stop me anytime and ask any questions you might have or comments. Cybersecurity. So the definition of cybersecurity is that it's measures taken to protect a computer or computer system, as on the internet, against unauthorized access or attack. Both are included. And it's specifically targeted towards computerized systems. So the scope is defined in this way. It has to have connectivity. So cybersecurity is a measure of control. So it's the way we manage the risk of cyber attacks. Interesting thing is first known use in 1989. So again, that's when technology began to kind of accelerate, right? Early 90s, mid 90s, 2000s, and it has not stopped since then. It's exponential increase. So what happened in 2013 was interesting. An executive order came out from the Office of the President that we need to improve our critical infrastructure cybersecurity. Talk about timing. 2012 Homeland, 2013 ABC interview, right? Things are happening in this time frame. So at the highest level in our government, there was a realization that something must be done. And that something was this executive order. Critical infrastructure, what that is, systems and assets, whether physical or virtual, so vital to the United States that the incapacity or destruction of such systems and assets would have a debilitating impact on security, economic security, that's also a problem for us, national public health or safety, or any combination. So they envision disasters, essentially, by talking about this. And it brought into focus and attention a need to take action. Part of this executive order was the order to NIST to come up with a framework that industry and other people could use. A voluntary framework that was not mandated. It was a voluntary framework. That's what we're going to talk about. So it has three parts. The first part is the core. So we're going to talk about the core. Then they have something called tiers, several tiers that you can plan your cybersecurity activities around, and a profile. So what's a core? What's a core? Core is basically a set of activities that are planned and designed to achieve some outcomes. We'll talk about that. Tiers we talked about is the extent to which you are meeting them today or planning to meet them in future. And profile is a business decision. How much? When? How fast? Those are the questions. And how can we get the entire organization to work towards the same goal? So it was three parts. So let's look at the core. Core has 5 different sets of activities. And they are not necessarily in sequence. They are happening concurrently, at the same time, and iteratively. You could do one, do another, come back to the first one, and do it all over again. Identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So it's very organized. And in each one of these, you have categories of activities and outcomes you can accomplish. There are many, so I'll just give you the numbers. 6 categories in identify, and we're talking about the business environment, the governance, the risk management strategy at the higher level. What are we going to do? But there are subcategories, and subcategories are more specific in terms of the outcomes you want to achieve. I'll give you a reference that you can just go and look up the entire framework. Yes?
On the identify, for instance, does that go into identify the specific risks?
Part of it, yes. Part of it would be identification of specific risks, but part of it also would be what should be our program? What should our program look like?
Okay.
And there is an implementation model that I will talk about.
Okay.
That will give you step by step.
This is identifying the framework of that program that
Correct.
you want to implement, not necessarily the specific risks in here.
That is also included under some of the subcategories. It's a long list.
Okay.
Long list. So there are many, many items. I'm just giving you a high-level summary. You can actually look up the reference that I'm going to give you in these slides. Same thing for protect. 6 categories. So a lot more subcategories. Protect is where you have to take the most action. And there's good reason why it would have the maximum number of subcategories. Detect, 3 categories, but 18 subcategories. Respond, 5 categories, 16 subcategories, and recover is 3 and 6. But they are links to over 400 references that tell you exactly how you should do and what results you should try to accomplish. So it's very extensive, very comprehensive. There's a long list of standards that they provide, and I've included that in my presentation. The point here is that this is a framework, right? This is not prescribed. This is something for all of us to take advantage of and adapt it and tweak it to our needs.
Good question. Are the subcategories arranged in a format of maturity level, or are they more like a pass-fail to achieve this level?
It's more what should be done. Maturity level would be on the next slide. So think of it as a menu. Think of it as a menu of activities and outcomes you need to accomplish in your cybersecurity risk management program. You don't have to do everything. You decide to what extent you should do it, depending upon your business situation and the regulatory requirements. Good question, good question. Here is the framework tiers. This is where you define, there are 3 areas: risk management process, integrated risk management, and external participation in your supply chain with your customers, your stakeholders. And it goes from 1 to 4: partial, risk-informed, repeatable, and adaptive. And each one of these categories, you have a description of what that is like. Okay, so for example, risk management process at the first tier could be very informal, ad hoc, and mostly reactive. It doesn't say good or bad, so we're not talking about a qualitative judgment. We're talking about what it is at that level. Risk-informed is where the management is now involved. It's sort of a management process, but it's still not very structured. It links to some business objectives and some prioritization, but it is not terribly structured across it. It's a little bit better than ad hoc and reactive. Some planning is going on. Next level is easy. It is by policy. So now it's policy, regularly updated. It's change responsive. What is happening outside, we respond to it. And at the final, adaptive, it has predictive ability. So our process now is able to predict what kind of risks might be meaningful to us, or what might happen in our situation. Lessons learned. So it's basically a full loop. It's more adaptive and goes through continuous improvement. Same tiers in integrated risk management. And what they talk about integrated risk management is integrating across the organization. Different functions, different business units, different teams, different departments, different quality management systems. Now, is cybersecurity integrated through that? So at tier 1, it's limited awareness. Maybe IT department knows a little bit more about than R&D, right? It could be that. And it's case by case. Maybe there are some projects which require us to pay attention to cybersecurity features. It's not very structured. There's no formal process across the board. That's a tier 1. So you can see now how the risk management is informal and ad hoc because of that. Now in risk informed, there's broad awareness, but it's still kind of informal and inconsistent. Some people do it. They might have their own internal procedures. They are not governed by like a central procedure, and they have kind of similar practices. They might have their own thing. But now in repeatable, it's defined approach, it's formal, it's consistent. We communicate with each other. What we are learning in one area, we communicate with another area. We build our skills. And adaptive is a very proactive approach. It reflects a risk culture in the organization, that we understand risks, we manage risks, we have formal processes, and we have a culture around risk. And we are resilient as a result of that. Okay? External participation is about, yes.
That last point on the right, resilience. Is that like backup systems? What are we going to do to?
Yeah, how fast can we come up? How fast can we respond to problems that may encounter? How quickly? And that's tier 4 in the adaptive. And all the work we do in our functions, our core, are aligned with this. The extent to which we follow those categories and subcategories outcomes are aligned with these tiers. You can expect on this side pretty much 100% of what those categories and subcategories are asking you to do. So external participation is important because we are not isolated. We are in a connected world. We have suppliers, and in many cases, very, very complicated supply chains, right? So on tier one, we don't understand our role in that supply chain or in that ecosystem of suppliers. We don't know exactly what is our specific role. Sometimes we act in a certain way as a customer. Sometimes we might be suppliers. Sometimes we may be very technical. Sometimes maybe non-technical. Sometimes maybe manufacturing ourselves. Sometimes we may be outsourcing stuff. So we may be doing things ad hoc and informal way as the business requires, right? We lack information about what's happening broadly in the ecosystem. What are the new threats and vulnerabilities that people are learning about? We hear them on the news. We don't have a lot of information. And we are unaware of risks. Not that we have ignored them, we just haven't paid attention to it, and it's not part of our process at that tier one. Tier one is very, very easy. Okay? Tier two is now we are beginning to define our role in a limited way. We have limited role definition. We have some information, maybe not most current information, or maybe only one part of our supply chain we have information about these threats and vulnerabilities, but we have some. And we have some awareness of supply chain risks. So it's kind of medium. Now these two tell you repeatable and adaptive is that now we have a clear role definition of not only us, but how we engage with everybody else. We have collaboration in our supply chain when it comes to sharing information about cybersecurity concerns. And we are responsive. Here, we are actually driving it. In adaptive, we are the leaders in the industry. We are sharing best practices, we are collaborating, we are communicating, and we are actually driving the field forward. So you can see how these tiers align with what the functions may require you to do.
ISO 9000, they've been doing it for a long time. So they go to their vendors and say, if you want to be a vendor of ours, we want you to be ISO 9000 also, oh, by the way. It's almost making me think that if you want to reach this higher level of cybersecurity, then before you plug into someone's supply chain, then you almost say, I got to know your pedigree.
Correct.
In other words, do you reach my level so you won't become a vulnerability to me if we're linking?
And it's absolutely right. And it allows you to define requirements. It allows you to communicate what our concerns are and what our expectations are. So you manage the risk through communication and requirements gathering. And that actually is happening even here. It should happen even in the repeatable tier. That's how we can repeat it. What's happening here is that we are actually responding proactively to emerging threats and vulnerabilities and creating new understanding and best practice. That will lead to new requirements definition, new standards. Maybe ISO 9001 or some other standard is not good enough anymore. Maybe it needs a next revision, right? So we are here in this area, we are actually driving the field, and we are getting better collectively in the industry. Good question. So it is not necessarily maturity level, because it is a matter of deciding which tier is appropriate for us at the moment, and where we want to be in future here, which tier would be appropriate for us at that time, so that we have full visibility and it becomes part of our strategy. We are not going blind, right? Hey, we're gonna grow our business 5x over the next 5 years. Everybody talks about that, right? We need to start thinking about what it will take for us to get there. Maybe we need to go from risk-informed to repeatable. And what will be our progression? So it's not maturity, it's not good or bad. It's not a judgment or a value judgment. Just because someone is at tier 1, they have a huge risk. Maybe, maybe not. Depends on what they're doing and how they fit into the entire ecosystem. What is not acceptable in some ways is not thinking about it. That's what the framework is saying, that this allows you a framework, gives you a framework to start thinking about where you should be, what is appropriate for you. Okay? It's meant to support strategy and decision making and prioritization. Consider cost benefit. Right? Hi, please. Consider cost benefit. Before, it's not something like nice to be adaptive. What's the business question behind that? What's the cost benefit? What's the risk? Or you may not have a choice. It may be required because of regulations or other requirements. You have to look at it. Tier selection and approval sets the tone for cybersecurity risk management. And guess who's going to do that? Where will that come from? Who should do the tier selection and approval? It should come from the very top. It has to be a boardroom conversation. People can do the work, come up with a recommendation, but the board sets the tone. If the board says, you know, we are okay being at partial for the next 5 years when we are expecting to grow and go into such different fields where the risks are high, what kind of a tone will that set? Not very
I would
favorable.
imagine though that if your company was big enough to have somebody like a CIO of nature, that him or her would actually be really kind of rattling the cage of the rest of the board, because a lot of that, I know, people, managers are human, and what they understand best is what they understand.
Right.
But
So
they don't like to bring up topics
sure.
that they don't understand. If it's about technology, they don't even know what they don't know yet.
Yep. And in fact, the good thing about this framework is that it gives you a model of decision and information flow. Exactly what you're talking about. Someone has to inform them, right? Someone has to bring the information, the context, the proposal. The point here is that the approval should come from the top so that it sets the tone and it assigns priority and resources, because at the end of the day, that's what matters. That's what gets done. Great question. So now let's talk about the profile. Right? We all start with the goals. What are the goals for our business? And they are many times driven by requirements. If we play in a regulated industry, healthcare being one, there are a lot of regulatory requirements that we have to follow. So some of the things that come to us and help us make those goals are because of requirements. And that lead to priorities. And along the way, we also generate best practices and learn from best practices. So what they are saying is that the cybersecurity risk management profile is informed by this cycle of goals, priorities, best practices, and requirements. It's basically defining your state of affairs, your profile of risk. You have a current profile, meaning you do something well today. Maybe you go back to the code, to the categories and subcategories, and figure out what are we doing today already. And then figure out where we want to be. What should be our target profile? Which tier should we be on? What are the gaps? So this is almost like the profile helps you to assess those gaps. This profile also helps you to communicate your requirements. It helps you assess and prioritize progress. So a profile supports business and mission requirements, prioritize framework, code category, and subcategory outcomes. It helps communicate risk management priorities within and between organizations. Remember we talked about external participation? If you have a profile, you know what kind of a profile you should expect from, let's say, a supplier, or let's say your joint venture partner. If my device has components that are coming from somewhere else, or my device connects to somebody else's device, I need to know their profile and my profile, where we should be based on the risk. Help identify gaps in current and target profiles, prioritization, and action plan. So these slides will be there for you. You can see this link, and there's a very nice packet of information available for anybody who wants to start digging into that. But this is very good. Okay, so here's a decision model. So at the senior executive level, it's more of a business process and a business decision. But how do they do that? They actually get information from the business process level. It's a little bit hierarchical, maybe relevant for big organizations, maybe not as clean or clear cut for small organizations, but someone is playing that role. Someone is playing the role of a business process person versus a top person, right? And at the operational level. So at this level, they are mission priorities and approved implementation tier selection. Remember we talked about that. What tier are we selecting? They have to approve that and direct the risk decisions. But they have to define what is our priority and what is our appetite for risk. What's going to be our risk tolerance? We can never have zero risk, right? Do we agree on that? We have to take some risk. Otherwise, we cannot do business anymore. We shut down. So what's our risk tolerance? How much can we tolerate? How much can our customers tolerate? What's our risk level? And appropriately assign the budget. In return, what these guys are going to monitor is some kind of a dashboard, a scorecard. New risks emerging, new threats and vulnerabilities being detected, our assessment of our performance against that. So they're going to be monitoring that, and this cycle will continue. So this is a linchpin here. They define the critical infrastructure risk management plan. They do the assessments. So that could be the CIO, for example, or their team. Nominate implementation tiers, develop profiles, allocate budget, whatever is coming from there. These are the profiles. Here is the operational level implementation. That implementation is monitored and assessed and then fed back all the way. So it's a little bit of governance going on here for cybersecurity, and this could be applied to any business process, correct? Not just cybersecurity. This kind of a decision information flow is very intuitive and in many business processes already happening. Goals and objectives are established at the highest level. They flow down to the business unit level. They flow down even to the individual level. So we are used to doing this. This is not new. What is new is specificity around cybersecurity risk management. Make sense, guys? Questions?
It's, I noticed, you're using the term says focus critical infrastructure risk, which isn't necessarily IT. So it would be other risks, non-IT, for instance, would be.
It could be.
Could be colluged into the risk management profile.
It could be, yeah. Critical infrastructure is defined in that executive order.
Yeah.
Remember we talked about that?
Yeah.
Anything that, when compromised, will have a debilitating effect.
Yeah, if I'm a paint manufacturer, then my assembly line for making the paint, as far as I'm concerned, if that assembly line's not moving, everything stops, I'm not selling any product, nothing's being made.
Yeah, so for you that has a different type of a risk. But similar model could be applied. You have a critical infrastructure for the risk that you are talking about.
That company might have a model of risk management, and then over here now we have cyber risks, uniquely cyber risks.
Right.
And is the model, are we going to use the same model for these non-cyber risks as we do cyber risks?
You could. They are not saying that have two different risk management systems. Right. The framework doesn't say that you do cybersecurity risk management this way and you do other risk management this way. They are saying you can integrate the two and harmonize the two processes. Don't reinvent the wheel. Right. Because you are used to assessing risks, you are used to managing them, assigning priorities. You can develop this or integrate this within your framework. And I'll give you an example about medical devices, how we can do that. Good question. So 7th step, I'll again zip through it very, very quickly. It's very intuitive. Define the scope. Starts from defining the scope. Align it with a vision and mission and priorities. What is the scope of the program for cybersecurity? No different than any other project or any other initiative or business process you want to manage. It's just more specific to cybersecurity. Orient systems is more about what are the different systems and assets. And by the way, you could have one tier for one business unit or a business process and another tier for another business unit or a business process. It depends upon the criticality of those two. In a large organizations, not everything has to be the same. You could make a decision that, hey, this part of our business could be at this tier. These systems and assets are included in this tier versus these systems and assets are included in, let's say, tier 3. You could have that system defined for you. Overall risk approach, meaning what's our risk tolerance? What's our policy? How much risk are we going to take it ourselves versus transfer to somebody else? What's our threshold? So some guidance and some criteria are always important. Okay? Current profile. We talked about the current profile. Where are we today? There are some things that we are doing in those categories and subcategories. Maybe we are not doing everything in that category or subcategory. So define, even partial, where you are. What's our level of achievement and what applicable references? Remember I gave you 400 references? And those are, main reference documents are the same, only a handful. But within those documents, they are pointing to sections and subsections where you need to go. It's pretty extensive. Okay? Assess risks. This is where you have to apply the risk management process. Likelihood and impact. We'll talk about that. How to determine what's the likelihood, what's the impact, what's the threshold for risk. And risk evaluation. Risk evaluation is about making a decision whether this level of risk is acceptable to us or not. And for that, we need to know what is our tolerance and what's our policy. Okay? Establish target profile. We talked about that. It's based on stakeholder expectations, where your business is going, desired cybersecurity outcomes, additional. So you will, in that list, the code, you will select additional categories and subcategories. Develop a plan. So gap assessment, risk-benefit analysis, timing and resources, and then implement a plan. So not much different than any other business process that you are used to managing anyway, right? So they want us to take this as a framework and not think that this is the only way to do it. It is very intuitive, right? So it's not much different. Important thing is continuous improvement, and that's what gets you to the adaptive level when you continuously improve. Long list. This is a resource to you. This will be in the slides, but these are all the standards that the framework mentions. And some of you may already be familiar with them. There's a lot out there.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a lot. But this will be a resource for you. Let's focus on medical devices. Right, I come from that industry. I know a lot more about that industry. So I will give you more practical perspective and examples from that. People have smartwatches. How many of you have a smartwatch today? Pretty much everybody. A smartwatch. You have an iPhone. A Fitbit. So we live in a world where we are using wearable devices to track and monitor and improve our health. This is only going to grow up. Okay? You guys have heard about Internet of Things, IoT. Guess what? Now there is also IOMT, Internet of Medical Things, and it's pretty big. From about $15 billion in 2017, over 50 in 2022. That's a prediction of only connected devices. Medical devices is much bigger than that. But this is a very high rate of growth. The next two numbers are a little bit concerning. Right? 67% of the device makers who were polled by this research believe that their devices can be attacked. 67%. That's pretty high number. But only 17% they are taking preventive steps. Big gap in our industry. In medical device industry, there's a big gap. Here's a very nice piece of research by Deloitte. Highly recommend that for anybody who's interested in this area. They are talking about the different issues, cybersecurity of medical device. So this is important, right? But this is a real world example. Anybody has diabetes is a disease which is so common. Many people in our lives that we know, our friends and family members, they are going through this, and it's a very difficult disease to manage over time. A lot of innovation. Most recent innovation here is from Abbott, Freestyle Libre. It's basically you don't have to prick your finger anymore. It's a continuous glucose monitor, and it goes on your arm, almost like a quarter-size button, and stays there for 10 days, and you just take a smartphone and gather that data. So it's real-time, pretty much real-time monitoring of your blood glucose level. Novo Nordisk has a connected pen. That pen is used to deliver insulin. It can keep track of how much insulin was delivered, when, and what type. So the idea is to combine the two from a data point of view. These are two different companies. We don't have any affiliation with these companies. We're just using this as an example because I think it's a sign of what's happening in our industry is a drive towards utilizing information to make things better and get better outcomes. Because managing diabetes at a personal level is very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. So the real-time monitoring combined with what was done with the pen has a lot of potential for the healthcare provider. This is not for the patient, but for the healthcare provider to utilize that information to now personalize the diabetes management at individual patient level. So that's the vision. Big bet, but I think it's a sign of times to come, right? So that's what their leaders are saying, is that connected pens will give healthcare professionals a better understanding of a patient's individual diabetes management. So what I described to you how it works, would you have cybersecurity concerns about this business proposition? I see heads nodding, right? Definitely. And this is happening today. So there's a lot of potential for cybersecurity issues to come up, and we have to be thinking about this. This is real work. Okay, so why is it more critical than ever? Well, guess what? Medical device industry is not, cannot rely on lack of public awareness anymore. Pharmaceutical, everybody knows, right? Anything goes wrong, it's news,
Yeah.
right? It's happening in medical devices too. A couple of years ago, AP came out with this big report, big numbers, right? Many people use medical devices. Anybody watch this movie called The Bleeding Edge on Netflix? If it's worth watching. Obviously a little bit, dramatic. It's a documentary, dramatized, but it's real people. When you hear from real people and how their lives have been affected by the medical devices have done phenomenal for our healthcare. Don't get me wrong, I've worked at the industry for 10 years. And the reason I do risk management is because I have so much passion for patient safety. When you hear those stories, you feel the pain. So it's happening. This became a big story, right? Anybody watches HBO? John Oliver? John Oliver did a segment on medical device safety issues. This is mainstream. So it's no longer in scientific journals or papers or some unknown databases that we can find. It is public knowledge. It's getting more and more available, and people are becoming more aware. So it's important. Even FDA is changing their position that they are now going to incentivize. They have a breakthrough program where you can get a fast track approval and a lot of engagement with FDA. They are trying to, next year, they're going to come out with guidance on innovation that will drive better patient safety. If your device can demonstrate substantial safety performance compared to another device, guess what? That's breakthrough innovation. So if FDA recognizes patient safety as a potential driver for innovation, and they're going to put systems in place to promote that innovation. The environment is changing. So let's talk about what FDA has done for cybersecurity specifically, because this is our topic today. We talked about the executive order in 2013. Soon after that, in 2014, FDA came out with a memorandum of understanding with an organization called National Health Information Sharing and Analysis Center. So there are a lot of these organizations that were created as part of the executive order to allow industry and public enterprises to share information about cybersecurity issues. So they created this memorandum of understanding to foster collaboration and information sharing, promote awareness of the NIST framework that was part of the executive order, right? Let's make people aware. There's a tool available to you to start utilizing. Shared risk assessment framework so that we could learn from each other best practices and utilize those across the board, and innovative strategies. So that was in 2015. Soon after that, they came out with a guidance, and those who work in this industry pay special attention to the guidances that come out from FDA, because guidances tell you how the agency is thinking. What is their thought process behind regulatory requirements? And if you have a device that's going to come out, it'll help you understand how FDA will think about granting you approval for that medical device. So there was a guidance specifically for pre-market submissions, which happens before your product goes to market, on cybersecurity. What they expect to see is inclusion of cybersecurity considerations in your design control. And those who are in this industry, they know design control is very big. A lot of problems with design control, but they want to see cybersecurity risks being identified and controlled, and software validation should be reflecting that approach. They are not mandating a NIST framework, but they mention that in the guidance, which means that it's important to somehow figure out how to make that work. Cybersecurity documentation is very important from that guidance point of view, and list of recognized standards, and I'll give you a list in this. After that, 2 years later, they came out with post-market management. So, okay, so now your device is approved for marketing, now what? Things are happening in the marketplace. Cybersecurity risks are changing. How are we keeping track of those? That's what this guidance was about. And they cite 2 standards, one about how to handle the vulnerabilities that we come across and how to properly disclose them. So these 2 standards were mentioned in the guidance as clear expectations of how FDA wants you to manage cybersecurity post-market. Okay? ISO 14971 is the framework for medical device risk management. And this will be an example for you to see how you can integrate cybersecurity in an existing framework already. It doesn't have to be separate. You can apply the same approach, and I'll talk about that. Remediation and reporting. So let's say you discover a bug and you have to issue a patch. What do? You are required to report to FDA events post-market that happen which may compromise or affect patient safety. There's a reporting requirement. So they have described in these guidances how that reporting should happen. Okay, in September they made this agreement with another ISAO, which is Information Sharing Analytics Organization, MEDAI. So these are the 2 organizations that you should have your eye on if you are in this field. There are other ISAOs for cybersecurity, and I'll give you a list of that. Similar to that, and they just added this MEDISAO. And in October 28, they made an understanding with Department of Homeland Security. Remember we talked about pacemaker being hacked, people being killed. There is an element of Homeland Security. So now there is information sharing and collaboration with DHS. These are the 2 references for you. NHISAC is National Health. They have changed their name. There's Health Information Sharing and Analysis Center. MEDISAO is Med Device Information Sharing. DHS is Department. So here's another list of standards. Those who are in this industry will find it useful, and it will be in your slide deck. Okay, so 3 recommendations. One is join an ISAO. It's in FDA's guidance. They are saying it's strongly recommended, which means that you really do it. And there are good reasons to be doing it, right? Here's a website that you can go, isao.org, information sharing groups. This is just a snapshot of healthcare related ISAOs. Remember I talked about NHISAC and MEDISO. They're listed here, there are others. But there are, I believe, 60 to 70 such groups. And there's membership, you join them, and you become part of this group where you can share information, collaborate, communicate. But from the medical device side, what FDA is saying is that this is the incentive, this is the carrot. Reduce reporting burden under Part 806 if you belong to an ISAO. Because then they know you have systems in place to share information, do risk assessments on an ongoing basis. You're not ignoring them. So you have a lower burden of reporting under 806.
Is one of the functions of, if you join that if your organization had an attack of somehow, that you would share that information with the other folks immediately?
Yeah, and there are standards for disclosure. Disclosure is not optional anymore.
Not optional.
No, depends on the severity and the kind of problem you have.
Okay.
You have to disclose. There are rules about that, standards about that. But yes, you will do that and you will share best practice. What happened? What did we learn when we did our investigation? What kind of vulnerabilities existed in our system that we didn't know? So that others become informed and they take appropriate action. The purpose of this is to get the industry as a whole better. It's not a competitive advantage issue, so there's no reason to withhold information. is to help everybody, because if one goes down, the whole industry goes down. That's the problem. So the key to remember is that there is real incentive coming from FDA from a reporting point of view. And they have given examples in the guidance under what circumstances you don't have to report if you are part of these organizations. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit more detail into how we can talk about risk. Okay, this is not just applicable to medical devices, but in general. Although I give you two references which are more relevant for healthcare, medical devices, or pharmaceutical industry, right? It's very difficult. It's very difficult because it's a matter of perception. And that's what we need to figure out, how to do it systematically and repeatedly. It's very difficult to quantify and figure out what the risk is. Achieving a shared understanding is also very difficult. So the model that they talk about is severity and probability. Severity is the impact. In this standard, they are talking about harm. Remember the pacemaker example? There someone can die. So this standard is more about harm, but you can broadly think about severity as what's the impact of an attack if it happens. Maybe your server goes down, maybe someone asks you for money, you pay up, right? Maybe it's a financial loss, or maybe it's a privacy law violation loss from a HIPAA point of view. Maybe it's something that really compromises safety of our patients. So it could be one or more. The reason I bring this up is because we are doing 14971 already, so we are aware of risk of harm. So we cannot stop at the impact of a cyber attack at the system level. We have to take it all the way across to the patient safety side. Is there a link, and how much of a link? So we need to define that. Probabilities, again, how likely is that going to happen? Now it could be qualitative. It could be rare, or it could be frequent, or it could be a specific number, and I'll give you some examples of that. But we have to define both. So let's take some. On a severity scale, it could be like a minor headache, or you could be rushed into an emergency room. On the probability side, chances of hitting a jackpot versus taxes, almost certain versus very little. So you could define a scale in any way you like. They don't tell you how to do it. It is based on your business, right? Questions to ask is, how do we establish a common scale? And that's not an easy question to answer. What applies to certain types of devices may not apply to another type of device. So we have to figure out an overall system, but that could be customized and tweaked for special situations. Same thing in IT, same thing in your businesses. The kind of risk you may have may depend upon different situations. So we have to have a common scale somehow. But how do we, in our industry, how do we treat safety risks, which is part of requirement for the standard, versus just product not working? Maybe the patient is upset, they call and say, I need another one, if they can, right? It's not life-threatening situation, maybe just like a minor annoyance or inconvenience. That's not a safety issue, that's a customer issue. Or let's say the software crashes, it didn't work. It could be a similar, or if that software crashes, maybe someone didn't get their insulin dose. That's a much worse outcome. So how do we differentiate between those risks? How do we develop appropriate risk acceptability? What is my threshold? Remember we talked about risk tolerance? Some people are very risk averse, say, I won't even fly in an airplane. But without that, we cannot do our business anymore. But some people are like that. People have different risk tolerances. Same way companies have different risk tolerances. But it's important to know what that tolerance is. What is our policy? So that people can make right decisions. How do we establish suitable data? Without data, you cannot do this. And now we are talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning. A lot of data is there, and people are learning to build methods and tools to constantly monitor risk. In the financial and insurance industry, that's happening today, and they're doing a pretty good job at that because they have tons of data, and the risk is also high. How do we evolve our risk analysis and evaluation methods over time? We talked about tier 1 versus tier 4. Maybe our process today is appropriate for tier 1, but how do we take it? Do we create something new, or does it also evolve over time? So these are not easy questions to answer, but they're important questions to talk about in your teams and in your organizations to come out with a common way of thinking or some policy. Okay, so some of the best practices, again, it may not be directly applicable to you, but it might spark some ideas. So we are thinking about two dimensions. We are thinking about severity and we are thinking about probability. Again, I won't get hung up on the exact numbers that I'm going to show you or the levels I'm going to show you. These are just examples. Important thing is to clearly define in the context of what the intended use is. And this intended use is much more critical for medical devices to be defined. It's a requirement. And everything needs to be defined in that context. Okay? But we need to establish standard terminology. A headache can be different things to different people. A headache is not a standard way. But there is a standard code for it. I talk about MEDRA. It's a medical dictionary for regulatory activities. It's a worldwide standardized dictionary. So recommendation is that if you're in this field, try to standardize terms so that people know what they mean. Right? Some people say when we do have these meetings and when you're doing risk assessments, and to someone a certain harm may mean something totally different than somebody else. And now we have this discussion, hey, this doesn't look like it's going to cause a lot of harm versus this. How do we know? We don't even speak the same language. So let's use the standards out there. Number of severity levels should span a relevant. It could be 3 levels or 5 levels or 10. Depends upon what is relevant for you. To what level of a resolution you want in your system. And doesn't have to be medical devices, right? Any system. Where do you want 5 levels of resolution versus 3? Severity level assignment should be done by a professional. In our case, a doctor. Do not let your engineers, I being one, do not let your engineers rate severity of harm. Because if they haven't been hurt, or if they haven't experienced that harm for them, maybe it's not as high. The doctor knows, right? So it's important. And it should not be product specific. I don't want to hear like, oh, my product can never cause that harm. How do we know? Have you gone and collected data? So don't make it product specific, make it patient procedure or patient experience specific. That's why we ask the doctors. And we don't say, you know, harm of X is low for this product versus this product. X is X. Let the doctor decide how severe it is. Okay? Those are some best practices. Here's an example of just 5 levels. And now I've seen people talk about death as level 5, and guess what happens? We're lucky that we have good technology, good risk management. We're not seeing very high frequency, so we are losing resolution if we use level 5 as death. So it's a small change in perspective, but it allows you to use 5 for some real serious issues. Otherwise, you lose 5. So it's just an example. Again, you don't have to use this table at all. But the reason I'm highlighting this is for you to decide your levels which are relevant and give you the resolution you need. Don't have 5 levels for the sake of 5 levels, and you never use 1 and you never use 5. Then you might as well use just 3. So don't use the resolution you're looking for in your risk management system. Questions on this? Make sense? On the other side, the occurrence, it's preferred to have a quantitative method, but not always possible. Sometimes you just don't know enough. And it may apply to cybersecurity quite a lot. Sometimes we just don't know. What is the probability? Ransomware, I think we know now that the probability is going to be very, very high. But even there, ransomware for certain types of data is much higher than some other type of data. So it's best to be qualitative, but I understand it may not be always possible. But that's the direction we should go. Start qualitative, but move to quantitative when you have the data. Select appropriate denominator, very important. Event, one event versus 100 events. That information is meaningless and cannot be interpreted in any reasonable way unless we normalize it. Is one event not important enough, or 100 events is when we pay attention? So one could be very important. It depends. The problem is we don't know how to normalize things. So denominator is important. number of procedures, number of units sold, people do that. Number of times something has been hacked, or number of near misses. These are good indicators where you could use them as denominators, but use the right denominator and use it consistently. Consider using publicly available data for similar products. If you're a brand new product, you have no data, but there's something similar in the market and that has 5 years of experience. You can get a lot of information from that. Update occurrence rates with product maturity. In the beginning, brand new technology, very sophisticated, it's possible that your rates are high and you may have to live with that, and you may have to decide how you're going to mitigate by information sharing, educating people, training, but it needs to evolve. Your threshold needs to evolve over time. Different occurrence rates may apply to different product families for the same harm. This is important. It depends upon what the product is and what it is being used for. Right? Case in point, let's say you are driving on the interstate versus driving on, I-95 in rush hour. Very different situation. Same action, same activity. Don't get texting involved in that, because that's a wild card we don't want to address right now. Different situation, and the harm could be same. Maybe you have a crash on both situations where the level of hurt you have experienced is about the same. Maybe it's not bad, but we should not assume that the highway driving is much riskier than driving on 95 in rush hour. The point is that we can expect to get hurt at different rates, and same level of hurt can happen in different situations. So we have to be aware of it. Failure rates are not the same as, this is very important for engineers. Like, we think that if the product fails, we equate that to harm. May or may not. So we need to treat the failure rates, and I've done a lot of work in that area to help people assess the risk of failures appropriately versus risk of harm, and make the connection between the two. So here's just an example of a table. Again, don't get hung up on the numbers. Levels are important. Get the right resolution, get the right thresholds, and get some quantification in this. It's a combination of these two that will allow you to estimate risk and evaluate risk. So now, if we do a 5x5 grid, 5 severities, 5 probabilities, we have 25 possibilities. And you can decide a combination of 5 versus 1, is that acceptable or not? Versus 3 and 2. You can decide and put rules around that. So it gives you a framework. What I want us to think about is that risk control is a process of decision making. Risk control is not random. It's a process of decision making and making informed decisions. So we will start and we will assess our severity and probability. Either it passes or it fails. We will put some controls. Now this applies to IT systems too. You'll put controls by design, right? You'll apply in the process. You'll have maybe some protocols. Who can access? Who can do certain things? Supplier controls. If there's a third-party software developer, you apply controls on them, right? By design. That's how you mitigate your risk. And you have information controls. Maybe you have a checklist for people to say, this is how you need to do your job. Or this is what you should be aware of. Example being, don't share your password with somebody else. That's an information control, right? We have to live with passwords, but we know not to share it with somebody else. We cannot get rid of password yet. There are some people trying that. So what we do here is that we compare them. The level of control, remember we talked about the categories, subcategories, and references. Those activities have some standards and requirements. You can compare with that. If you're meeting that standard, maybe you are state of art. You don't need to do anything else. That's as low as you can get, given the knowledge and the state of art. But, yeah.
So, yes, very good probability. So in FMEA, it could also include detection. So if I had a pacemaker and it failed, but I didn't have the need for it, and I went into the doctor and they noticed it failed, they repaired it, versus detection that a signal is sent that it's now failing, go to the doctor.
Got it.
Is there consideration to include detection
Yes.
as part of the formula?
Yes, it is considered as part of the formula. It is always better to have detection before it goes out in the field and gets implanted. Right? So it's better to have detection control in your factory than rely on detection in the field. Because maybe it's too late. But sure, that's a possibility. So you will do this cycle of control, options analysis, implementation, you will evaluate, and then go back again if it doesn't work. So it's an iterative process of learning, and that's what we talked about, continuous improvement and sharing information and best practices. And you will accept the risk, or in some cases transfer the risk. In some cases, you will mitigate it somehow by control. Or you can say, I'm flying blind. But even when you fly blind, you gather data, right? You gather data to inform your decisions so that next time when you have to do that, you get better at it. So you can do risk control in many, many different ways. So this is just a process that is described in 14971. Gives you a method, but this can be used anywhere else. Okay, so now this is actually a technique for cybersecurity risk assessment. It gives you a severity scale. This is a calculator online. It looks at a basic group where you have exploitability and impact. We talked about how easy it is to exploit something. That's probability. And impact was severity, right? So these are factors that someone will rate a certain vulnerability on this scale. This is time-based, like may change over time, but not across user environments. And this one is environment dependent. Maybe it's a server versus a laptop, not connect, or maybe it's one single machine versus multiple connected machines. So essentially, this is a system which is recognized by the FDA. They mentioned that in the guidance document. You can go online. It gives you a score from 0 to 10. 10 is the worst, 0 is the least. So closer it is to 10, the more severe that vulnerability. So remember, it's an assessment of a cyber vulnerability, a potential problem that can happen, and you are trying to score it. It's done by experts and professionals. So typically you would ask an application developer or a software provider to give you a score for their application using this methodology. Okay, so key players are, they are analysts who do this for a living, security product vendors or application vendors. So here's an example. This is a diabetes pump, wireless communication with other devices such as glucose meters and sensors. Now the problem is it does not implement authentication or authorization protocol. It's not like someone is breaking into it, but the system doesn't allow an authentication. It's an old system. So they rated this on this scale and got a score of 7.1. You get a string like this. When someone has rated this, you get a string, and this, actually I tried this. I used this string and I calculated online, it matched the score, 7.1. 7.1 is considered to be high. This was part of a FDA safety communication where the devices were recalled. These were old devices which could not be fixed by a patch. And they had a bug, basically a gap. Not that someone actually broke that, but it was discovered and it was a vulnerability that was potentially severe enough for them to take action. Questions on this? But this is a tool that you may want to use in your cybersecurity vulnerability assessment, particularly because it's mentioned by FDA in their guidance as well. But for others also, it may be very relevant. So in closing, cyber attacks are on the rise, right? We agree with that. It's not a question of if, but it's a question of when. I think it's a critical aspect of any risk management today, even if today none of your devices are connected. They don't operate in a connected environment. But guess what? Your operation still does. Your manufacturing shop or design shop, people are using computers which are connected to the internet. All your intellectual property is there. Potential to ransomware attack. Internet of Medical Things expected to drive medical device innovation, but I can see in your industry, whichever industry you are in, the technology will drive the innovation. And more, it's the data and the knowledge side of your product that will be more beneficial and value add and a differentiating factor for your customers. Everybody will be able to design maybe products which do basic functionality, but how do you delight the customer? And that's where you will have to really work with the data. So I think it's not just Internet of Medical Things, it's Internet of Things. Like it's happening in our life too, in our home life, personal life, anywhere we go. So this is going to drive innovation, which means cybersecurity is an issue that we need to all think about. Regulatory scrutiny and expectations, and I speak for that in my industry. It is on the rise, it's an evolving field. So even the agency, I think, is trying to figure out how to regulate this and how to define their expectations. But I gave you a timeline, and you can see there has been a lot of action from that. ISO 14971 framework can be used for, and we are doing that. Already, medical device companies are supposed to already be doing this. If they are selling in Europe, they are supposed to be doing this. FDA has recognized that. So, point here is that you don't have to do something new or brand new. You can integrate that into your current system. Okay. Last slide about what I do. I do customer experience, regulatory compliance, risk management, and quality culture. So, based on 20 years of experience, I bring that expertise of cross-functional expertise to clients. And here's a pitch for my newsletter. I've written about cybersecurity on my blog. That's why this talk came about. I had just written up, and Vayner called me to say, can you give a presentation? And I said, sure. So if you want to be in touch, feel free to sign. That's all I have. So happy to answer any questions, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.